You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Icons, where listeners are introduced to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. On this episode of Icons, Thomas is joined by Karhlton Moore, Director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance and former Executive Director of Ohio's Office of Criminal Justice Services, where he oversaw state and federal grants for law enforcement, victim assistance, juvenile justice, crime prevention courts, anti-trafficking efforts, reentry, corrections programs, and traffic safety. A career dedicated to criminal justice reforms, Karhlton knows the importance firsthand of having adequate public safety professionals. As he states, "I never once heard a single person say we want fewer police. I never heard that, not one single time." And now for Icons, featuring Karhlton Moore, Persistence and the Power of Collaboration.
Well, thank you for being here today, Karhlton. It is very generous of you to spend some time with us and share a little bit about your story and your experience within the criminal justice system.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to be here. And this is my third time coming to this facility, which is an incredible facility. I hope more people take the opportunity to come visit the Law Enforcement Museum.
Good. Thanks for saying so. I agree. Yeah. In my opinion, and this could be wrong, not many people know about the world you live in, the world that you work in. So I'm excited for today's episode to shed a little bit of light on your work at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And if I recall, while you were at the Office of Criminal Justice Services in Ohio, you were able to push some really important police reforms through without passing a single bill. Is that right?
That's true. That's very true. Not me alone, but
Sure.
A group of us were able to work together.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so we'll get into that later in the episode. But I wanted to start off with learning a little bit more about your experience growing up in Ohio. You had brothers, sisters, parents that had high expectations for you guys, and
very high.
And so I'd love to learn more about that, your formative years, and how your parents steered you all in that direction.
Sure. So you're right. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio. And great family, wonderful experience growing up. Some things you don't know about until you're exposed to other things. So I had older brother, older sister, younger brother, younger sister, and I was right in the middle.
5 total?
Yeah,
right.
5. So my parents had 5 kids together. My dad was married before, and he had 3 kids. From that first marriage. And, sadly, with both marriages, the youngest kid, so my sister, Sylvia Kay, she passed away. And my youngest brother, Crichton, he passed away. And so, but it was, I love my family. We all holidays, we text each other, we have a family text that we send things to each other. But growing up, I had what felt like a normal childhood to me. We didn't have a lot, but a lot of people on the street that I lived on didn't have a lot. But the biggest advantage that I had growing up was I had both my parents. And for a kid to have 2 people who you are the most important thing in the world to, it just gives you a leg up in life. And sadly, I see a lot today and have seen throughout my career the impacts of people never having that, not having one person who they're the most important person in the world to. So, if someone said, "Hey, I could give you," you could trade. You could trade living in a nicer house, or not having to wear the same pair of pants to school every day, or not having to tape your shoes together because they're falling apart. You could trade all of that, but you'd have parents who don't care about you, but you'd have every material need that you'd ever want. I would never trade it. Right. It's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so did anything in your adolescent years or high school influence your interest in pursuing a career in law and criminal justice?
Yeah, to a certain extent. The thing that I noticed, and as a little kid, it takes you time to process like the world and kind of your place in it. But as I got older, I realized, and I saw it firsthand, that the world is very different depending upon how much money you have, what neighborhood you grow up in, what schools you go to, what lawyer you have, what lawyer you can't afford to have. Things are very different, and it gives you a different outlook on life. And I think at times, if you've never had the experience of wondering, when am I going to eat again? Do I feel safe? Am I safe? I don't think it's not that you can't relate to people, but perhaps you don't think about it in the same way as a person who's actually experienced those things. And so I was always interested in, once I knew what the word was, fairness, fairness. And so I was we had an attorney, my parents had an attorney who helped them with, different things that would come up, wills, and, you have family members die and different things like that. And so I just became very interested in the law, but I was always just kind of drawn to criminal justice, TV shows. I used to watch T.J. Hooker, growing up as a kid. And I know probably a lot of people listening to this are like, what's T.J. Hooker? But, things like that I was really interested in. And so when I remember talking to a friend of mine. We were in college together, and we'd grown up together. And I said, I really want to be in a position to help people. And I don't know if that meant, what exactly that career would mean to me, but I wanted to do something that was impactful. And it's almost like I didn't want to tell people, I think I want to go to law school. And he's just said to me, you ever thought about going to law school? And I was like, I've thought about going to law school for a really long time. I hadn't shared it with my family. I hadn't shared it really with any other friends. And so, so it was kind of that life. And then that moment, having another person say that to me, because, my parents didn't go to college. No one really else in my family had gone to college at that point. My oldest brother, he joined the Marines. And so not just going to college, but then making the decision, hey, I'm going to go to law school also. It was almost like my buddy Jason, he almost like did me a solid, because he kind of broke it. And when it was very clear that this was something that he thought was a great idea for me, it made it so much easier to I am going to go to law. This thing I've thought about for so long, I'm going to go do that. Yeah.
It can make a difference when somebody else sees you in that position.
Yes.
And it's not just you trying to imagine yourself there. I think that adds a whole nother level of support.
Yes.
And I grew up in a similar situation, whereas my parents didn't go to college either. And so I know that I personally struggled a lot through that process. I mean, even the application process, even the financial aid process, navigating that. My mother, I was raised by a single mom, didn't know quite how to navigate that either. And so I'm wondering if you kind of had any similar challenges navigating that. I mean, it sounds like your parents had a vision, for you guys from the get-go. So, maybe they were right there, arm in arm.
They were always supportive. I mean, they were very, very supportive of all of us getting our education. And we all did. My brother went to the Marines, which is a very noble service that he provided to this country. He was in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. He went back to Fallujah during the second Gulf War. So he did amazing things. My oldest sister, she got her education. She graduated from college, got a master's degree. My younger sister, right after me, she graduated from The Ohio State University. And then my youngest brother, Karhlton, before he passed, he graduated from college as well. So we all did these things, but it's a challenge when no one in your family has done this before. How do you even get money to go to college? And so one of the biggest struggles, and here's the other thing, there was no internet. I mean, I don't think people understand how you figure out all these things. I mean, you're going to the library, you're going to different places to actually get the information. And so you've had no experience in doing this before. And filling out the FAFSA, it was such a struggle. Trying to get answers. You're asking your parents questions about this and that. And then, my dad is one of these, he was a great guy, but he was very distrustful. Why do they need to know this? Right. Why do they need to know, about the value of our house, or how much money's in my bank account, or how much money I made last year? So that was also a challenge. As a matter of fact, when I got it done, I realized, when you go through that experience of filling out a financial aid form, you have some unique knowledge. And I started to think about other people who are going to go through the exact same thing I went through, of having no idea how to do this. And so when I graduated from law school and I moved, because I went to law school here in DC, I went to American University. I moved back to Columbus for the first time. I volunteered for an organization called I Know I Can. And its job was to help people fill out financial aid forms. Wow. And so I can't even tell you how many FAFSAs I've filled out over the years, but to help people fill out those forms. But they're even filling out those forms, when you get to the part where, and this would happen sometimes, have you ever been convicted of X, Y, and Z? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you realize this person's one opportunity to get into college, because they don't have the grades that are going to give them a scholarship. They don't have the athletic ability that's going to give them a scholarship. What they have is this opportunity. This form represents their entire opportunity. So to get to that point, and then people can't go to college, and to see that realization on a person's face, on their parents' faces, it's a horrible thing. Mm-hmm. It really, really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a friend that had a similar experience, who was a few points shy on their SATs. Mm. And I watched his whole path change.
Yeah.
And frankly, never recover.
Yeah.
And when you see your own path, your own trajectory, and you keep doing well, and one opportunity comes after the other, I mean, it makes a really big difference.
It does. I mean, I think about that all the time. How different would my life have been if as a kid I did something incredibly stupid, and all of a sudden that avenue was cut off from me? I don't know what I'd be doing right now. I met my wife in law school. We have 4 kids. I've met so many incredible people. I have friends who I met in college who I'm still friends with, people I met in law school I'm still friends with. And then those things open doors for you. I mean, you and I wouldn't know each other. We wouldn't be sitting here right now had I not had that experience.
Right. Let's talk a little bit. I want to fast forward to early parts of your career, how that started. You've gone through college, you decided to get your JD, you got your JD, now you're ready to go. What were some of your early goals that you had and then where you ended up?
So when I got to law school, I was interested in criminal law. I joined the Criminal Law Society at American University, met some incredible people doing that. Actually, there was an event that was being put on, and our president of our Criminal Law Society, she asked that we needed people. Like, I think it was going to be on C-SPAN, and so they really wanted to fill the room with people. And I was asking a friend of mine, hey, can you come to this? And she was like, I don't think so. Well, then this other woman who I was in class with, she said, do you need people to go to this? I'll go with you. And I was like, okay, well, that was my wife who said that to me. So, but I thought for the longest time that I would end up as a prosecutor. And that was really what I was focused on doing, was being a prosecutor. And I was really looking at New York, Miami, Philly, Chicago, and actually I had a crazy experience just a couple weeks ago. I was in Miami, and the state's attorney for Dade County walked in. And so I was there with a group of people looking at this facility. And so she walks in and she's introducing herself to everyone. She gets to me and she goes, don't I know you? You look really familiar. I know you, don't I? This lady had interviewed me 20 years ago and remembered this. I mean, that's crazy, right? And I said, yeah, you interviewed me. And she said, you turned us down, didn't you? So there were some other folks from the Department of Justice who were there, and they were like, wow, we didn't know anything about this. But he's with us now, so it's all good.
Right.
But so that's what I thought I was going to end up doing. And then I had interned at the Ohio Attorney General's office. And, you always have an affinity for the place you grow up in. And so I grew up in Ohio, and so when that opportunity came, I actually interned one summer, and then it became very clear they wanted me to come back and become an assistant attorney general. And so I got the offer, I accepted, and moved to Columbus, Ohio.
Let me back up real quick because I want to ask about the Criminal Law Society.
Sure.
So what role did that play in your education compared to, what you were asked to do in a classroom or at home? How did being a part of that and making a decision to be a part of that help you in some way?
Well, I think the thing that helps, so, when you go to law school, you learn legal concepts, you learn a way of thinking, but there's kind of two things that give you real world, like this is the real world. And this is how things actually operate. One is trial practice classes. And I took trial practice. It was great. Actually, it was co-taught by two people, a sitting judge and then an attorney. And so you really learned a lot about, okay, I know they taught us this in class, but here's here's the actual ground for this objection. And here's the way the judge is going to rule. So that was great experience. And then Criminal Law Society exposed you to practitioners, people who were doing the actual work that you were interested in doing. Right. And it also gave you like your own, everyone's always kind of looking for their people. Like where do I belong? Sure. Like where do I fit in? So to find these other people who wanted to go into criminal law the way I wanted to go into it, it was just kind of like having a support system.
Yeah. All right, let's jump back to interning right?
Yes.
In Ohio.
Yeah, so I did. I interned in Ohio at the Attorney General's office in the capital crimes litigation section. And so capital crimes, that section was primarily responsible for, we practice habeas corpus law, which is a very narrow area of law that a lot of people don't really think that much about. But basically, people would sue the state claiming that either their sentence / punishment or their trial was unconstitutional. And then so you would get these writs for habeas corpus, and then you would write this return of writ, and you practice primarily in federal court. There's some state habeas, very little used. And so that was kind of, as an intern, I supported some of the attorneys in doing this work.
And then how long did that internship last? And then how did that internship set you up for the role as an assistant AG?
Yes. And I have lots of people come to me. It's funny, you go from you're the new person, you're the young attorney, and then one day you wake up and maybe you're the oldest person in the room and people are now coming to you for advice.
Right.
And I always tell people, have you done an internship yet? Internships are a great way to learn about what the real world actually looks like and the culture of an organization, right?
Right.
Some people dream about going to some organization, like, I want to work there. And then you spend a few minutes there and you're like, I don't fit in here. I don't want to be here. So internships, I think, are a great tool. And now, like, I got paid as an intern.
I was going to ask if it was paid or unpaid.
Yes. Yeah. And we pay, and when I was in Ohio, when I was at the Office of Criminal Justice Services, we paid our interns. And I think, recognizing the value, because interns bring value to your organization. I mean, they do a lot of work. People depend on interns to do a lot of work. And so I think it's important that we pay people. But it gave me, I've never lacked for confidence. But it was like confirmation. Hey, you can do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What set you apart from, I think you told me there's 500 assistant attorney
there's
generals.
something like that.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's just in the state of Ohio?
Yes. So, I'm not sure if it's 500 AAGs. I think I think that is the number, somewhere in there, at least back when I was there. I think that was roughly what the number was. And, what really helped in my career was every case that I had, every client that I had, every meeting that I had, you have to be a professional. And sometimes people don't really understand that. Like there's always someone watching what you're doing, always. I ended up with this little case. I started in the capital crime section. I ended up in the court of claims defense section. And this is where states waive their sovereign immunity and allow people to bring lawsuits against it. And so I was a defense attorney for the state in the court of claims. And I got this case that I think a lot of people saw as a throwaway case. I know the client was incredibly unhappy with the representation that they'd received. It was, I think a lot of people would describe as a nuisance case. But it was my case. And for me, I was going to get to go to trial and do depositions and do discovery, provide discovery. And so for me, it was the most important case in the world. And the client, I met with the client over and over to let her know exactly where we were with the case. And then we went to trial. and we won the case. And the client was happy, and I was happy. And it's these types of things. I remember I had an employee who wanted a promotion, right? So they want this promotion, and the guy's a really smart guy. The current job that he had, he was not very good at it. So we're having this discussion. He's explaining to me how he wants this promotion. And I'm questioning him about the job he's doing right now. And he says, that job is beneath me. It kind of blew me away, right? And I explained to him, I would never promote a person who doesn't do their current job well. Like you're a professional. You're a professional. You have a responsibility, especially when you're working for the public. You have a responsibility to the public, not just to yourself, not just to your colleagues in your organization, but the responsibility that you have to the public, because you're in public service. And so I think when you have the attitude of, I have to do a good job, and it's already kind of inside of you, like, no, I'm going to do a good job. And this little case changed my career. It very much changed my career, because little did I know that client was talking to someone at the governor's office. And when a position was available at the governor's office on the governor's legal staff, that client said, I just had a young attorney who did an excellent job on this case, and you guys should give him a call. And they did. They gave me a call. And so I went to the governor's office. I never applied for the job. I never put in an application. I just got a call one day. My wife and I were coming back from vacation. I had a message on my phone. Hey, the governor's office would like you to come over and interview for a job. And so I did.
How old were you at that point?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to say,
when you decided to take the case on that you described, how old were you at that point?
Let's see. I would have graduated. It was like 25 when I graduated from law school. I would have been, I think, in my late 20s when I took that case. Yeah.
That's impressive. That seems like a lot of, it's a big goal.
Yeah, it was just, and the amazing thing about it, and this is what I tell people all the time about jobs, and people stress over where they fell in their law school class and all that kind of stuff. Like, do a good job when you get a job. Right. Do a good job when you get a job. Yeah. I didn't apply to go to the governor's office. I didn't go through an application process to go to OCJS. I never woke up one day and said, I want to be the director of OCJS. And then I became the director. And then I thought, well, it's only going to last 18 months, but I'm going to do a good job. And it lasted 17 years. And then to have this opportunity to come to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, it is all, there's been a number of moments in my life, in my career, that made an enormous difference. But at the base of all of it was, do a good job. Do a good job. You owe it to the public. You owe it to your employer. You owe it to your colleagues. You owe it to your partners. Do a good job. And it's paid off for me.
The role of Assistant Attorney General, where does that fall within the legal field in terms of a stepping stone? I mean, with hundreds of people in that position, and I'm sure they're all tackling different issues, after graduating law school, is that entry level position? What's the goal of people who are making that decision in comparison to people who are going into the private sector or other firms?
So I never wanted to go into the private sector. As a lawyer, I never really wanted to. I think I applied to one place. The irony is, like, this year, coming to BJA, I met the state's attorney who I had interviewed with, and I ended up at a meeting in New York with the only law firm that I even applied to, right? So we held this meeting at their location. An assistant attorney general is both an entry-level position, and then as you're there are opportunities. You can become a supervisor. You can become a section chief. You can become I think maybe there's there's an assistant section chief. Maybe some places have principal attorneys, something like that. There's all different areas. I mean, the Attorney General's office does incredible. I mean, there's a wide array of, from consumer protection to criminal law, issues affecting labor. I mean, a whole host of responsibilities. And so the opportunity to move up, like I had to leave the Attorney General's office to move up. But it was the great thing about it, and the reason why private attorneys or law firms sometimes end up hiring assistant attorney generals is because when you go to a law firm, it's going to take you some time before you're sitting first chair for a trial or even for an oral argument, right? You get tossed into the deep end of the pool, right? When you are an AAG, you're there and you're going to have cases and you're going to go before judges and you're going to have, I mean, we were handling the most serious cases you could handle, death penalty cases, right? And so you get tremendous experience very quickly. And very often what you see happen is AAGs leave and they go into the private sector because they value that experience that they've had.
Right. So going back to the opportunity in the governor's office, was that work aligned with what you were doing previously, or was it totally different?
It was totally different. It was completely different in some ways. But there was one part that my experience in the capital crime section, I think, played an important role, and that is in clemency. So I was Governor Taft, Bob Taft, I was his clemency attorney. And so I think a lot of times people think of clemency as only related to death penalty. There's clemency for all types of things. There's different forms of clemency. So there are reprieves. You know, when you delay someone's sentence, right? So if someone's sentenced to death, governor gives their sentence is about to be implemented. Governor gives them a reprieve. There's commutation. So that's like a short delay. That's a delay. There's commutations where you just, someone's sentenced to 20 years and it's switched to 10 years. What we used to do very often was to make someone parole eligible immediately. That was often one of the tools that we had at our disposal.
Because then it would still go in front of a parole board.
Right.
Essentially, they would make the decision.
Right. They would make that decision. And then there's just a pardon, which is, hey, this never happened. Go about your life. It's not quite that simple because your record is still out there and you might have to go through extra steps to get it sealed. And there's some work that's been done on that area to make sure that when someone gets a pardon, that what governors intend to happen actually happens. But there's lots of different, we had, I'm trying to think of the exact name of it, but it's basically people who are so sick that there's no point in having them in prison.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So, there were also medical, like a medical commutation that you would have. So I did a lot of that work. We actually did have one death penalty case where the person, and these are some of the decisions that you make, right? I get a call from our Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. We have a guy who's going to be, he's going to be executed the next day. We are in discussions internally inside the governor's office. His sentence is going to be commuted to life in prison. And it's very hush-hush because the governor has not made his decision public yet. DRC calls me and they want to know, should we drive this guy from the place where we're keeping him to the actual place where his sentence will be imposed? And so here I'm, and everything happened seemingly after 5 o'clock, right? So there's no one else around. And I tell them, no, do not move this guy. Don't. And I remember thinking in that moment, is this a decision that I should be making? Because this is definitely, I have a lot of things going on in my mind. And then later there are reports about how this guy hasn't been moved or anything like that. So, I mean, there's so many decision points and decisions that you make. It was the right decision, because I think if we moved him, I think people would have been upset with the expense that would have gone into doing this, when we knew all along that he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So there was no point to it. But my experience in handling habeas corpus in death penalty cases, it lent itself to the clemency work that I did that involved death penalty cases. And but outside of that, it was a lot of in-house counsel stuff. I mean, I looked at so many bridge agreements, land transfers, sitting in on meetings, stuff like that.
Right. Just to go back to the clemency work briefly, what's the process and what was your role in that process?
Okay. So
and then how does it go from you and to what level next?
Okay. So the process for clemency in Ohio, and I know a lot of states have similar processes, is you actually apply to the Ohio Parole Board for clemency. The Ohio Parole Board makes a recommendation. It's I think when it's full, it's a 12-person board. They make a recommendation to the governor whether or not the governor should grant clemency to this person. When they submit their recommendation, it comes to me. It would come to me and whoever is the clemency attorney now. I review it. Sometimes there might be additional information that I want. I might want to look at transcripts or look at other pleadings from the case. I might want to talk to witnesses if it's a very complex case. And then from all of that, I might talk to, like I used to talk to she was the lieutenant governor at the time. She's currently our chief justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. She was the lieutenant governor. She was a former prosecutor. And so sometimes I would run cases by her just to get her thoughts. But then I write up a recommendation. I share that recommendation with the chief legal counsel. They might have questions back and forth. Then that recommendation is submitted to the governor. Then the governor often had questions. And so you would engage back and forth with the governor. If the governor grants clemency, let's say it's a commutation, you then have to put together a document. I mean, it's like this old style looking, almost like parchment paper looking document that you would put together. I would have to contact the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. Has something called the Bureau of Sentence Computation. So there is a claim for false imprisonment that often happens because someone has been sentenced to prison and they're in prison longer than they're supposed to be in prison. And so it's actually, and a lot of it has to do with when a person was sentenced, were they in jail before? Yeah, right. Were they given credit for the time that they were in jail and stuff like that? And so I would contact them, relay what the governor's intentions are to them so they would know exactly what to do. And then the actual document, that old style looking document, would get filed with the Secretary of State's office. And then at some point the governor, well, depending on if it was high profile or not, the governor might make a public statement, or sometimes there was no public statement.
Fascinating. That's quite a process. And it's, going back to, you're still early in your career. Right? I mean, that's a lot.
I think so.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
When you're in your 30s, right?
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
And to be behind that desk and considering decisions that will have profound impact on people's lives is remarkable.
Yeah, one of the jobs is to contact the attorney and tell them, hey, the governor has decided to grant clemency, or the governor has decided not to grant clemency. And, in that moment, sometimes you are the recipient of how they feel about the decision.
Sure.
And of course, they have no idea what you recommended. Maybe you recommended
Sure.
clemency.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
but it was all part of the job.
Wow. So I wanted to go back to what I mentioned when we first started about your work with OCJS. Maybe you could touch on a little bit how you went from the governor's office to OCJS. But I really want to dig into the reforms that you were able to achieve, you and your team, working with different law enforcement leaders in Ohio without being able to pass a bill, right? How do states achieve their goals without having to rely on legislation?
Yeah. So in a word, relationships. It takes time. You have to build up trust, but people have to understand that you have their best interest at heart. You have the interest of what's best for the public, but you can't get that done without relationships. That's not something that just happens overnight. You know, I spend a lot of time right now because I was in Ohio for 17 years as the OCJS executive director, and I had a lot of time to build relationships. Well, I'm new now, so I'm building all new relationships and trying to spend time with people and to get to understand people. But it was relationships. And, you know, when people know that you're going to be upfront with them, that you're going to be honest with them, you're going to give them bad news when bad news is coming. Some people don't want to share bad news with people. Look, I can deal with good news. I can deal with bad news. I can't deal with no news, and I can't deal with not knowing if I can trust the words that are coming out of your mouth. So that I've never really understood that because it always comes out. But when you can build those types of relationships, then you get to know people and you become friendly with people. I mean, the executive directors of the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police, Donna Braxton, and Buckeye State Sheriff's Association, Bob Cornwell, you know, they're friends of mine. I mean, we went from colleagues, we worked together, we worked on difficult issues, and we still disagree about things. We still disagree. It's not like, okay, well, we're friends now. It's just that we have something to fall back on because I know if Bob is like, Karhlton, I can't do that. I know he's doing what he believes is best for his members. And when I tell him, look, I'm not going to lie to you, but I can't tell you this. He knows that if I was in a position to tell him, I would share it with him, but I'm not in that position. So it's really building relationships and having trust among colleagues. And it takes time. It takes time. And the work that we were able to get done, you know, Governor Kasich, we had a horrible shooting. We had a couple of them. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a park, right? And so ultimately someone calls the police on Tamir. The police show up within, less than a second. You know, Tamir is on the ground dying. And then we had John Crawford III, who was shot at a Walmart. And a few people went to Governor Kasich and said, look, we need to do something. We need to improve community police relations, and we need to do this now. And the governor said, let's do it. And the reason I even found out about this is because my boss was in this meeting, and he calls me and he says, hey, look, OCJS is going to change forever because the governor is going to create this task force on community police relations. You're going to be the facilitator of the task force. OCJS is going to staff it. You know, so we waited. We got the governor's executive order. It required us to hold a minimum of 4 public meetings. And then and this was the thing I was really, really proud of because I've been speaking this language. And it's probably for people outside the criminal justice system, it's nerd language to them, but evidence-based practices. And in the executive order, it said to develop evidence-based practices to improve relationships between community and police. And so I thought, okay, all that talking, now I see those actual words in the executive order. And so we held the 4 public meetings. We went all over the state. We listened to people. And I was really focused on listening to people. I was just talking to someone, a young lady who's in college now. I used to coach her in basketball when she was in middle school, right? She plays college basketball. Outstanding college basketball player, very smart young lady too. And she asked me, what's the most important communication skill? And I told her listening, actually hearing what people say. I sit in conversations. I'm sure you've had conversations, and you're like, were you in the same meeting? There's no way you were in the same meeting, because you have no idea what was said because you weren't listening or you didn't take it in. So we listened. And like I'm holding up my device for people who can't see it. This thing right here, the last thing I was going to do was, as people were standing up, because everyone was welcome, in uniform, out of uniform, good experience, bad experience, whatever the case was, people could come and share whatever they thought needed to be shared to help us as a state improve and it's an incredibly important relationship between communities and police. Right. And the last thing I was going to do was, as this person is sharing this thing that they might have spent years just wanting one person to listen, to be standing there staring at my phone while they're so. And I instructed my staff, we're not on our phones. We're going to listen. And people shared incredible stories. The most interesting thing, There were 2 things that really hit me during that time. One was, even in places where that bad relationship between community and police, where they did not have a good relationship, I never once heard a single person say, we want fewer police. I never heard that one single time. So that really struck me, because I went into this wondering what I would hear. And then the other thing, there was a young man in Toledo, and he got up to talk about kind of the whole stop snitching, like don't be a snitch, he's a very young man, and he's really explaining to this room full of people how ridiculous that is. And the only people it hurts is us, the people who are being victimized by folks. But then he turned to a couple of the police officers and he said, but you guys don't tell on each other either. And I had never thought about it in that way. Now, obviously, there's lots of people who tell the police what's going on, and we have to have that. And there are lots of police officers who tell on their fellow officers. I had one who worked for me. And it was a tough situation for him to go through. But it was an incredible experience to go through that process of listening to people. And we had this incredible panel. Anthony Munoz from the Bengals was on the panel. We had prosecutors. We had people from the faith community. We had Congressman Stokes, who's in Ohio. He's since passed. But, I mean, he's like a great name, that it's Terry, Ohio. I think that's the case, yeah. Terry Stops, that was from a case that he had argued. So it was an incredible group of people. Former governor, former senator, former mayor of Cleveland, George Voinovich, was on the committee. And Nina Turner, who was a state senator, she was on the committee. It was a very incredibly diverse group of people who understood the importance of this moment and came together. We put together a report. It was about a 600-page report with about eight key recommendations. I think there were over 100, like 170, 180 recommendations, but really 8 kind of key recommendations on how we could move forward. The biggest one being creating voluntary standards for law enforcement agencies. individual police officers have to go through academy. They have to go through a certification process to become a police officer. An agency, one day a city just decides we want a police department. And I never knew this before I got to OCJS, but I would see policing agencies come and go. I mean, they'd pop up, all of a sudden they'd want grants for equipment, and then they're gone. And so but there's nothing that governs, well, how does a police agency actually operate? And so what we sought to do was to create a set of uniform minimum standards. So it wouldn't matter if you were in Jackson, Ohio or Cleveland, Ohio. You would if you did run into police, there would be some uniformity in the way that they responded to certain things. Our first two standards were on the use of force, including deadly force, in hiring and recruiting. And so that was really our opportunity to reform without going to the legislature, was to create this reform. And the standards were voluntary. And that that was kind of a hard-fought place to get to, because there was pressure on, let's make it mandatory. And I'm saying, like, inside the administration, there was pressure. Some people wanted it to be mandatory. Some people wanted it to be voluntary. And so ultimately, we went the voluntary route.
What year was this?
Let's see, 2015, 2016, it would have been in that time frame.
So it's after Obama's 21st century task force.
Yes.
Right? Did you follow at all part of that model, or how did you all construct how this task force would operate, travel, engage?
Yeah. So, there's no blueprint, right? We had this executive order with our responsibilities that were outcomes and outputs. But in terms of how we did it, where we went, who we listened to, we had to decide all of that. I decided that what we should do is, we decided on the four locations. We went to Cleveland, Toledo. We went to Central State University, which is one of our HBCUs. And we went to Cincinnati. And we utilized college campuses. So we went to the University of Cincinnati, University of Toledo, and then Cleveland State. And so there's not even any guidance on where we should put these, but this is what we decided to do. And then on top of that, what do we do at these meetings? So I thought what we should do is bring in people to talk to the members and to the audience, to educate them on issues that were relevant to why we were there in the first place. So on issues of use of force, on all these issues, kind of touch button issues in law enforcement, issues on how community and police can work together. We had this tremendous collaboration that we had created called OSERV, the Ohio Community Initiative to Reduce Violence, where it was a number of cities across the state who utilized a focused deterrent strategy developed by David Kennedy. And it was put into place in Boston that tremendously reduced the number of group and gang related homicides. And so to highlight, look, here we are in one of our major cities, and police and community are working together right now to reduce crime. And I think trying to hold up, and I think we need to do more of this, hold up these examples. People think everyone's always at each other's throats. That's not the case. There are places all over this country where people are working together. We get lost in a lot of this noise at times where it seems like everyone's at their throats and no one gets along. Well, in the real world where people live and they're trying to solve problems, you have to work together. And so to be able to highlight that effort in Toledo that was also going on in Cincinnati, and in Canton and in Youngstown and in Dayton. I think it meant a lot to the people who were there.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the voluntary versus involuntary. Why was making it voluntary so critical?
Okay, so this is one of those things where when you start thinking about how to get something done, I think it's always a decision point. Okay, do we make this mandatory or do we make it voluntary? And I had come very early to the conclusion that we had people, because they had talked about it over the years, we should have standards, or we should have something like that, some type of standards. And my concern right away was that all these folks who have been pushing for this, the moment we say you have to do this, we're going to lose some of them. And we need them. We really, really need them.
But they would have to do it.
Well, here's the other thing.
They wouldn't do it well, right? They reluctant.
Would they do it? I think probably with the structure that was being talked about, they would do it. But I think you're right. Would they own it?
Right.
Because that's what I was looking for.
Sure.
I was looking for, I kind of had a couple things from the very beginning of this. This has to be seen as legitimate. Has to be legitimate in the eyes of the public, has to be legitimate in the eyes of police. But I also knew we needed the policing agencies. We needed them. And the moment we said, you have to do this, I knew we would lose some of them. And the other thing, from working in Ohio for so long and working with a lot of different agencies, I just felt like a lot of them would just do it. They would do it. Even initially, if they held their nose and did it, I knew they would do it. And I knew there are others who would think, I'm not doing this. You could take away all my funding. I will never do this, right? Right now in Ohio, it fluctuates. Between 85 to 90% of the Ohio population is served by an agency who is collaborative certified. Between 85 and 90% of the police officers work for an agency that is collaborative certified. The voluntary method worked. It worked. And I did interviews with people. I met with law enforcement executives. We had one agency who said, can you send us multiple copies of our certification? They were so proud of this. And I think that changes the moment you say, this is mandatory and you have to do it, because it was their decision and then they got to own it. And it was great to be a part of that. And it created the Ohio Collaborative Community Police Advisory Board, which creates the standards. And then it was me and my staff, our jobs to write standards, to get them approved by the board. Sometimes we would come up with what the standard would be about, the subject matter. The governor identified the first two standards, and then I want to make sure I have my governor straight. I think Governor Kasich wanted a standard on telecommunicators or dispatchers because they had played very key roles into both the Tamir Rice shooting and the John Crawford, the third shooting. And then Governor DeWine had done some work on police pursuits when he was the Attorney General. And so he asked that we create a standard. I was like, very early on, he said, I want a standard on police pursuits. And so we created standards on those. But the thing is, when 2020 happened, and we had the summer of George Floyd and the summer of COVID, we had an infrastructure that was already in place. And we worked with the policing agencies to ban the use of chokeholds. And there's more to it than just chokeholds, but and to limit those to instances where use of deadly force would be constitutionally permissible. But it was all that work, and it was meetings, and it was hard. I sat in meetings, and I had people pissed. I mean, yelling and screaming. It was rough. I had people tell me they would never do this. I was at a meeting in a very small community. I went, and there was one police officer. He was so proud. He told me, he was like, and I stood up to the governor. I said, well, it was voluntary. And he goes, no, it wasn't. I said, yes, it was. It was voluntary. Well, that's not how it made it seem. I said, okay, what happened to you when you didn't do it? And there was silence in the room. It's like, well, yeah, it's because it was voluntary, right? This guy had made this great stand on a voluntary thing. Like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Everyone else in that room, you know what they did? They got certified, you know, because we put the work in, and then they understood the importance of it. Because here's the thing. The public doesn't look at, okay, that's DC. That's Metro Police. That's that's Baltimore PD. Those are state troopers. You know what they see? Cops. That is it. So when Ferguson happened, I think that was maybe the first time that everyone realized, you know what? What happens? One policing agency in one small town that most of us had never heard of before can impact what happens all over the country. And to try to convince agencies who already had like this high level of accreditation that this might not do anything to change operations in your agency, but if we lift up that floor in other agencies, it's going to make your officers safer, and it's going to make your public safer as well. And so a lot of them decided to do it.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how did you eventually kind of sway the administration in that making it voluntary?
Well, you know, the governor, I'm trying to think how much I should tell. So the governor wanted people's opinions, and every governor I've worked for, they did. They wanted your opinion. And so here, and this is the other thing. If you're not willing, and this is something that drives me crazy. If you're not willing to give your opinion, then shut up. Okay? Don't complain when something goes sideways. Don't say, I knew it. And you obviously can't say, I told you so. You're there for a reason. You're there because of your experience. You're there because of your knowledge. And you owe it. You owe it to them to share that with them. And I felt very strongly. Now, there was a very senior person on the governor's staff who felt very strongly the other way. And we were all at the governor's residence, and people were sharing kind of their thoughts. My boss was sitting there, John Bourne. He knew I thought it should be voluntary. And so there was a high-ranking person who shared their belief it should be mandatory. And then the tool that they would utilize to make it mandatory. And so the governor's kind of like, is anyone feeling different? I can see my boss staring at me. No one else has said a word. I'm the executive director, but it's governor's office staff. There's my director. I think there might have been another cabinet official there as well. And finally, I just speak up and I say, Governor, I think it should be voluntary. And then I went through kind of what I explained to you as to why. And he kind of looked, anyone have objection to that? Okay, well, it's going to be voluntary. And that was it. Wow. That was it. And I also knew I was going to be responsible for the certification process. So I had to develop a certification process. And there were still struggles and there were still bumps in the road. But that decision, which I only made a recommendation. And there's an enormous difference between making a recommendation and making a decision. So the governor had to make the decision, but I think it was a great decision that he made.
Yeah, and had you not been in the room, had you not shared your opinion, I imagine things would be very different today in the state of Ohio.
They could have been very different. I don't know. Sometimes I think at times I felt like I was maybe, you probably don't remember the Mikey commercials, the Life cereal.
Yeah.
Mikey, they're like, let's get Mikey. I'm not going to try it. You going to try it? Yeah. He likes it, and so I think everyone kind of got, because what I'm telling you is what I share with other people. I share with my staff what I've shared with colleagues. You're there for a reason. Like, I love Hamilton, the story of Hamilton. And one of my favorite songs in Hamilton is The Room When It Happened, right? Well, imagine you're in the room where it happens and you sit there silently. Right. You're not going to be in very many rooms after that, are you? Right. Or if you are, what point does it make? Sure. Right? So not to say this was as profound as that room, but you owe it to the principal to share with them your knowledge, your expertise, your experience, and to provide them with that. And there are plenty of other times when I provided people with stuff, and they're like, but the other thing, though, is this. Once a decision is made, that's the decision. There's no, they decided to do that, but I was against it. No, there's one decision. That's it. That becomes the policy of an administration, and you shouldn't do things to undermine it afterwards.
Yeah. So you mentioned your staff, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your team. I had the opportunity to meet Hope and Melissa last time we met. And so I was just curious about, what makes them unique? What do they bring to your team? And, talk a little bit about the benefits of having those trusted colleagues from one agency to another throughout your career.
So staff is everything. It's everything. You have to depend on them. You need to be able to trust them. You do quickly realize the people who, when you say, hey, I need this, and whatever that is, shows up for you. Right. And the people you say, hey, I need this, and a week goes by, and a couple weeks go by, and you're like, hey, where's that thing I asked you about? Oh, yeah, I'm working on it, right? So staff is everything. And I have been blessed with, at the Office of Criminal Justice Services, incredible staff. I'm so excited because 2 of them are coming to town today, because we're having a convening at the Department of Justice to talk about the Deaths in Custody Reporting Act and work that we are doing on it and gathering information to make it better. So I'm excited to see some of my old staff from Ohio. Hope and Melissa, Hope actually worked at OCJS in Ohio. When I got to OCJS, Hope was the acting director. And so you can imagine how comforting it was when I pack up my bags and become the new guy, and right around the corner from my office is Hope. Mm-hmm. Her office is right there. Hope is a professional. She is an over-communicator. And I think when I was probably younger, that kind of thing drove me crazy. It's just kind of one of my things. Like, I heard you the first time. Like, you don't need to tell me twice. I have come to respect people like that so much, because there is value in someone who is constantly giving the same message. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. She cares deeply. She heads up our Public Safety Officers Benefits Program. She cares deeply about the program, about the officers. And there have been times when there's always disagreements, inside of government. There's always disagreements. And Hope has been someone I can really lean on, as you're trying to figure out, okay, I really see this differently than everyone else sees it. Am I off somewhere by myself? Right, and to be able to have Hope, who I know and trust, to lean on and say, hey, Karhlton, stick to your guns, So, and the other thing is, even though we're not that far apart in age. And now, I'm 50. I know when we met, I was in my 30s. But she's still kind of like, I got really sick at IACP in Dallas. I thought I had COVID. So from like Friday evening, Friday evening, I get really sick. Saturday, I'm in my hotel room. And I don't do anything. I probably had like 8 presentations I was supposed to do. And my team stepped in. Wow. They all got together, came up with a plan. Who's going to cover for Karhlton here and here and here. And they did all of that. And Hope was one of those folks. But Hope also, she looks out for me. So she and another guy who also worked in Ohio, David Lewis, they get a COVID test. So they come to my hotel, and I get a call. They're like, hey, Dave's like, hey, we're downstairs. We have this COVID test for. I said, just leave it at the front desk. And he's like, yeah, Hope won't let me leave it at the front desk. So they come upstairs, and Hope sees me, and I see how big her eyes get. And I can tell I don't look so good, right? From her reaction.
Too honest.
Yeah. And then she contacts me later, and she's like, I'm supposed to fly out today, but I'm happy to stay, take you to the doctor, take you to wherever you need to go, get you medication, whatever. And I mean, just to have people who care about you as a person also,
right?
It just means a lot to you. Melissa, she and I have a mutual friend. Melissa we are so fortunate to have her. We're fortunate we have a ton of incredible people. I'm not going to name all of them because I can't name all of them. And I'll forget someone, and then someone will say, well, why didn't he mention me? But since you ask about Melissa and Hope, I'll just share about the two of them. And Melissa really is in charge of our stakeholder engagement. And like I told you, you asked me, hey, how were you able to get reform done without any legislation? It was relationships. And that's what Melissa's here for, is to help us build our relationships, to make them better. And that's not to say that we have bad relationships. I think we have really good relationships, but the best relationships can be improved. And she is real. And to have a person, because I've got other people, we've got 59 different grant programs at BJA. We're going to administer nearly $2 billion this past year, right? And now we're looking at next year. And that number is fluctuating between like 62 to 69 grant programs. These folks are busy. So to have a person who can focus on, I'm going to help this organization cement their relationships with stakeholders so that they know that we are open to them, because they are our customers. The public are our customers. All the different aspects of the criminal justice system, these folks are our customers. We need to be transparent with them. They need to know that we have their backs, that we're trying to develop tools and resources that will be responsive to the needs that they have and the challenges that they're facing in their communities. And so in order to get to that point, you really have to develop those relationships, because then people share things with you that you need to know, that will help you do your job better. And if you do your job better, you're able to assist them better and ultimately assist the public better, which is what we're all there for.
Right. I wanted to turn it back a little bit more personal with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about your mindset and, listening over, the last hour or so of what you've been able to accomplish. I assume it's challenging, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And as somebody who's married with 4 kids, I can imagine juggling all of those things and the needs of a state agency and now a national one. So talk a little bit about just how do you balance all that?
Oh gosh, it's a challenge. I couldn't do it without my wife. While I'm here, she's there, and our kids are active kids too. So, fortunately, the 17-year-old, he's finally driving. I couldn't wait to get my license. This kid, but he got his license, right? So I have 4 kids. I have a daughter. She is in her second year at the University of Cincinnati. And then I have 3 sons. So my daughter, she got really good grades. She's getting really good grades now. She played like travel soccer forever and then decided she wanted to run track. So she was like the 300 meter hurdle person. That was like her thing. She was really, really good at it. So we were constantly like driving. And then I have driving her to places. But then my 3 sons, they're all 3 left-handed. They all 3 play travel baseball. They are 11, 14, and 17. And then my daughter's 20. And it is a constant getting them to stuff. The 17-year-old also plays football. I coached my daughter, the 17-year-old, and the 14-year-old in basketball when they were in middle school up until 8th grade, all 3 of them. And so it's busy. It's really, really busy. This is a less busy time. The 11-year-old is playing basketball. And so, and fortunately, we live very close to the school. But it's, there are times, and I've had nothing but support from the Department of Justice when I'm like, I can't be in D.C. this week. We have kids checkups and student teacher conferences, and we just have things at home that I have to be there for. So it's a challenge. But the other thing is we have great friends who help, like our 14-year-old. He almost lives with this family in Grove City over the summer, which is great because he and their son play on the same travel baseball team together. And so we never really have to worry about him. It's like I know Bill and Kim have him, so he's off with them, right? But it takes a lot of patient support and planning. I have so many calendars, and every Friday at BJA we have a director scheduling meeting, and I do the director scheduling meeting. I have an iPad open that has my BJA schedule, and then I have an iPad open that has my home schedule.
Wow.
And I literally have to go. It's like such and such group wants you in Orlando on such and such a date, and I've got to look over at the home calendar and figure out that's not going to work, or yeah, that will work. I kind of have a balance right now where I'm here in DC kind of Sunday evening to Wednesday, and then I'm back home in Ohio. If I'm traveling, I don't usually travel and come here, so it's worked out really well.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's great to have that work-life balance, even at that level. What about, I forgot my question. The good thing is we can edit all this. Oh shoot, where did I want to go? Oh, so, how do you maintain the energy to do all of that? Do you have a particular fitness, nutrition? What is it that provides you with the ability to manage all that? I mean, having the skill to manage those things is one thing, right? But having the energy to do it consistently every day, week after week, year after year.
Yeah. So I do. And this is like one of the things when I first met the staff, so I started February 28th of this year. I think that's right. And we had like this webinar where I introduced myself to the staff, and one person brought up, there's a person who's like a really, I guess, a tremendous baker. Like they make all kinds of great food, right? And then they said, I'd love to bring in something. And so I said, well, I kind of have a eating routine where I only eat between like 12 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Sometimes 11, and I might slide it to 8 or cut it off at 7, depending on how I'm doing. I'm going to do really well today. I mean, it's 11:44, and I've only had a cup of coffee with no cream or sugar. So I do that, and then I try to eat well. The area I struggle, I need to get more sleep.
Right.
I need to make myself go to sleep earlier, because you can get into a routine because there's never enough time. And I was talking with the acting director of the COPS office, a great guy named Rob Chapman, and we were sitting next to each other at this convening that Perf was doing, and he made a comment to me about, because I was telling him how crazy busy he is. Like, I mean, he travels a lot, and then he goes, like, I think he's in Uvalde like once a month that he's there. And he said, but you have like every aspect of the criminal justice system. And so you can never know it all, right? You're just constantly learning new things about BJA. I worked with BJA for a long time. I didn't know about the public safety officers benefits section. I didn't know anything about that. There was a grant program that we had called the Internet of Things. I've never heard of this, right?
Right.
Some of the hate crime grants that we have, I wasn't really that familiar with them. So there's so much. So at times when I'm doing really well, I'll say 11 o'clock, you got to put everything down and you got to go to bed. It's a little more manageable when I'm in DC, because
Sure.
I don't have 3 kids
Right.
running around the house, right? And my youngest son, Cam, he would walk into here right now, see us doing this, and he would just start a conversation with me about something that
Right.
he just wants to share,
Yeah.
right? Because he just, when he wants to talk, he wants to talk. Doesn't matter what you're doing. So it's a little bit easier, but I try to work out. I got years ago, I stepped on a scale one day and it said 207. I thought, oh my God, how did I get to 207 pounds? And so I decided I wanted to lose weight. And of course I do in the nerdy way. I do so many things. I research what are the most effective methods to lose weight. Which ones help you get weight off the fastest? Which ones help you maintain weight the best? Which ones allow you to feel like you're not on a diet? All these kinds of things. So I picked something. I got like way down. I went from 207. I think the least I ever weighed was maybe like 162, 161, something like that. But then I was like, now I'm just a little dude, right? So a friend of mine I saw on Facebook was doing P90X. So I decided, I'm going to do P90X. So
What's P90X?
So P90X is, it's a workout routine that you do for 90 days.
Oh, got it.
So I did this workout, right? And it was challenging. It was really challenging. But all these things that you do, they give you confidence. Like, I just lost 40 pounds. Like, I can do this for an hour each day.
Yeah.
And
now what else can I do?
Exactly. And you start to get a certain mindset of, if I really set my mind to it and I really work for it, it won't always work out, because there's plenty of things that I've wanted to do, tried to do, that didn't work out. But it gives you confidence that, hey, look, you can do these things. So I did that for a while, and then my wife and I, we would do, there's this YouTube videos that we do now, and recently, because of traveling and stuff like that, and you just kind of get off your schedule, I was like, I don't have a plan right now. Like I'm just kind of, your body finds a weight and then you just kind of maintain it. Mm-hmm. Well, my body found a new weight that I wasn't so happy about. So I went back to my roots. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I went back to doing that workout and doing that same eating routine. And it's only been a short period of time, but I feel so much better already. But you have to take care of yourself. It's a pretty demanding schedule, but also it's an incredible opportunity. You get to see this country. You get to meet people in all parts of the country, all walks of life. And the thing that I've found, I went to the UK. I went to Anchorage. I've been to the South. I've been to the Midwest. I've been to the West. You know what? People are the same. Mm-hmm. They're the same. They might talk a little different in places, but people want to be safe. Mm-hmm. They want to raise their families. They want to have a nice job. They want their kids to do better than they did. That's what people primarily want in life. And it's at this time where it seems like we're so focused on pointing out our differences and how we're different, there's still so much. We're just the same. Mm-hmm. We're just the same.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's really important as leaders in law enforcement and really any field, consider their own health, their own wellness, so that they can be successful and they can lead their agencies, lead their organizations, so that ultimately our communities are safer.
Yeah. One of my heroes, and this is a guy I've met late in life, a police officer from Cincinnati, a guy named Don, and he dealt with a really difficult situation, right? And it really impacted him a great deal. And so one of the last standards that I worked on, it's called agency wellness. Initially, we had called it officer wellness. But the police officer said, you know what? The entire agency, dispatchers, non-sworn staff, they're all experiencing this stuff together. So let's call it agency wellness. So we did. We called it agency wellness. And we always have a meeting, and we had multiple meetings. We start to develop the standard. We bring in presentations for the members of the collaborative board to hear, and it's a 12-person board. And Don was a police officer. Like I said, he had dealt with this thing that had really impacted his life, impacted him a great deal. And actually another colleague of mine, Robin Ingle, she's coming to town today also. And she knew Don really well, and she was on the collaborative. She's still on the collaborative board, and brought him to us. And he went through his story. He just walked through it. And you could feel how nervous he was. You could see it. And afterwards, I told him, I said, it's one of the bravest things I've ever seen a human being do. And the fact that he was willing to share his story, the impact it had on him, on his family, on the people who reported to him, I think there had to be so many people listening watching that saying, I've been in that same spot, mm-hmm. and I need to do something. We've got to, and one of the things I've really been focused on is officer wellness. Officer wellness is so important. One thing I asked Don, I said, what was your ability? Tell me what your ability was while you're going through this to engage with the public. And he said, everyone was a threat. Mm. I saw everyone as a threat.
Mm. Wow.
So, if people don't care about it because they don't care about him as a human being, and I think most of us can have empathy and sympathy for another human being. The fact that it could impact you Even if you don't know it, it's impacting people. So we've got to take care of these folks. We have to. We ask them to do some incredibly dangerous things. And you sit around and listen to them talk about these things that they do. Like it's, like it's riding a bike or something. I mean, it's incredible.
I know.
It's incredible to listen to. And my first public event as the BJA director was I went to Atlanta for the IACP symposium on officer wellness. And I was so pleased to be able to go to that. And then eventually it was great because the Associate Attorney General came to the event. She's the number 3 ranking person in the department. The Attorney General came to the event. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. Everywhere I go, the Attorney General and the Associate show up. This is great. I mean, that's not the case. Right. But the first 2 places I went, that did happen. But we have a program called the Valor Program, and it is focused on, it's a suite of programs focused on officer safety and wellness. We have another program focused on officer suicides, and we've made pretty significant investments. I'd like to invest more, like to be in a position to invest more into these programs. And, you meet people along the way. There's this great guy, police officer in Chicago, this guy named Rich. And Rich, usually if I fly into Chicago, sometimes he'll pick me up at the airport. And it's great meeting a guy who's an Ohio State fan in Chicago. We had a rough weekend, I'll just put it that way. Right. But, he shared some of the stories about losing fellow officers. And it's a tough job. That doesn't mean that everyone who does it's perfect, because there are people who shouldn't be doing the job. But the overwhelming majority of these folks, they're trying to do the best possible job they can, and a job that we would all be proud of them for doing. And we just have to be there to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go, I wanted to ask if there were any final words of wisdom or favorite quotes that you have that have inspired you that we could share with our listeners.
I do have, there are a lot of quotes that I really like. The Man in the Arena speech from President Roosevelt, that is from Teddy Roosevelt. That is a great quote. The way that quote ends, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I mean, wow. Doesn't that just hit you? Yeah. Right? But then I have 2 others that I really, really like. One is, it's actually an African proverb, and it is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And then there's one from Dr. King, and Dr. King it's I can never be all I ought to be until you are all you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And I think what both of those quotes really show, we are in this together. And we are tied together. Our destinies are together. Our ability to impact and solve problems, our best way to do it is to do it together. And I think those quotes really just kind of incredibly articulate words that just in their simplest form mean we're in this together.
Yeah, love it. And for our listeners, Director Moore did not read any of that. He has committed that to memory, and we will put that in our show notes because we all always need some good inspiration. So thank you again for being here today. This was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Good. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Icons featuring Karhlton Moore and hosted by Thomas Canavan, the museum's executive director. We hope you found this conversation enlightening and will join us again for another edition of Icons, where we introduce listeners to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.